It was 4 o'clock on a gray Saturday afternoon in September of 1875. A faint wind moved across the open field between Manchester and Liverpool, carrying the damp scent of soil and smoke. On that uneven patch of earth, 37 performers gathered before a large wooden camera, waiting for the photographer to lift his hand. They stood in perfect formation, some balanced on tall wooden stakes that trembled beneath their weight. Others remained still, their faces painted, their eyes fixed upon the glass lens as though staring into the future. Behind them rose the great striped tent of Godfrey's Grand Menagerie and Curiosity Show, glowing faintly beneath the fading sun. In that single frozen moment, every type of wonder Victorian England adored was present. Acrobats poised with calculated grace, giants whose shoulders touched the lower edge of the tent, women who could twist their bodies in ways that seemed to defy anatomy itself. A family of 6 Polish siblings stood side by side, their posture revealing both discipline and exhaustion. Among them were the Siamese twins, joined forever at the chest, gazing in different directions as if dreaming 2 separate lives. And in the center stood a woman named Constance Fairchild, known to the public as the Elastic Woman. Her frame appeared ordinary, but those who had seen her perform described movements so unnatural that they bordered on the divine, or the cursed. And then there were the children. There were always children in the world of Victorian spectacle. Some had been born under the canvas, some sold, and others simply taken from lives no one would remember. In the photograph, 6 of them can be seen. Their faces carry neither joy nor rebellion, only a deep stillness, as though they understood something no child should ever know. When the camera finally flashed, a small puff of smoke drifted across their faces, capturing that instant for eternity. No one who witnessed the scene could have imagined that within 6 hours, every single soul in that image would be dead, not one survivor. And the truth of what happened that night remains one of the most chilling mysteries ever recorded in the forgotten annals of Victorian England. There was no restlessness among the children that evening, only that trained quietness that came from years of being watched, years of learning how to exist beneath the gaze of strangers. They had become living displays, aware of every glance, every whisper. The night in September began without distinction, one more stop in a long tour that had already crossed half of England. The caravan reached the outskirts of a small industrial town, whose name history never agreed upon. Some records spoke of Wigan, others of Warrington. Whatever the truth, the uncertainty itself would later complicate every attempt to trace what truly occurred that night. The tent rose on a rented field beside a stretch of railway, 30 meters long and 20 wide, supported by an enormous oak mast that pierced the air like a monument. Iron stakes buried deep into the soil held the sides firm, while a web of cables and ropes stretched beneath the gray evening sky. Silas Godfrey had spared no expense. He had built his show not on illusion alone, but on stability, believing that security and wonder were 2 faces of the same promise. Yet the weather that day had been unpredictable. Across northwestern England, storms brewed and dissolved without warning. The air carried the chill of the Atlantic and the restlessness of thunder that never quite arrived. When the photograph was taken that afternoon, the clouds hung low but harmless, concealing whatever menace lingered beyond sight. By 8 o'clock, lanterns glowed at the tent's entrance. The faint scent of roasted chestnuts and pipe smoke drifted through the crowd. Families, factory workers, and merchants filled the wooden bleachers, exchanging laughter over the noise of vendors shouting their last sales. 3 pennies for the side benches, 6 for the front, a full shilling for the best view. For many, it was a costly indulgence, but it was also a small escape from the endless rhythm of machines and soot. Inside, beneath the flickering oil lamps, the performers prepared in silence. Few noticed the faint groan that came from deep within the oak mast. It was not loud enough to alarm, only enough to make one think the wind had shifted. The wood looked flawless from the outside, polished and strong, yet within its core, a hidden rot had been eating away for months, waiting for a moment of perfect pressure to deliver its final betrayal. At precisely 8 o'clock, the curtain lifted. Silas Godfrey stepped into the light, his voice booming with confidence and charm. the kind of tone that could make danger sound like invitation. He welcomed the audience to a night of marvels, of wonders beyond human understanding. Then came the acrobats. The 6 Polish siblings ascended the ropes with effortless grace, their figures cutting through the smoky air as drums rolled from below. The crowd leaned forward in admiration. Every swing, every leap seemed to defy gravity itself. No one could see that above them, 3 meters above the base, the heart of the oak mast was hollowing out in silence. The audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. Every moment unfolded with flawless precision, exactly as planned. Then came the segment known as the human curiosities. The giants were introduced first, their towering figures standing as living testaments to nature's extremes. The crowd gazed in awe, captivated by their monumental statures. Next, Constance Fairchild took the stage. With a calm smile and deliberate grace, she performed her astonishing contortions, bending her body into impossible shapes that defied every known principle of human anatomy. Then came the Siamese twins, presented beneath the tent's spotlight, 2 lives bound together by birth, their existence turned into a public spectacle for the sake of fascination and science. After them, the children appeared, each one possessing a strange peculiarity that drew both curiosity and sympathy. Every presentation followed a carefully rehearsed script, one crafted to evoke emotion, while cloaking itself in the appearance of scientific dignity. At approximately 9:45 that night, the air outside began to shift. The wind, at first gentle, soon gathered strength. Occasional gusts pressed against the great tent, causing the heavy canvas to ripple softly. It seemed harmless. Circus tents were built to endure far stronger storms. Yet what was forming beyond those flapping walls was not an ordinary weather disturbance. Later meteorological reports would describe it as a microburst, a violent descent of cold air from the storm above, striking the ground and spreading outward at terrifying speed, exceeding 150 kilometers per hour. Surviving witnesses, those who had remained outside the tent, would recall that the sky turned an unnatural shade of darkness. Lightning tore across the low clouds. Within minutes, the temperature plummeted, and then it arrived, the wind, not as a breeze building with time, but as a solid, invisible wall slamming into everything in its path. Inside the tent, the audience first noticed only a rising noise from outside. The canvas trembled more violently now, the ropes straining under tension, producing sharp, high-pitched twangs. Performers instinctively looked upward, reading the signs with the intuition of those who had lived their lives beneath temporary roofs. Silas Godfrey, maintaining the steady composure for which he was known, continued his narration. Yet as later witnesses would swear, a faint trace of tension had crept into his voice, an echo of the storm that was about to break. The great mast at the heart of the tent began to groan. It was a sound that few could hear clearly, but everyone close to it could feel the vibration humming beneath their feet, deep through the wooden floorboards. Within its core, an unseen fracture widened under the immense lateral strain of the storm. Each gust of wind pulled harder on the upper cables, and within the wood, tiny fibers began to rupture, one after another, like a chain of quiet detonations spreading through the structure. At precisely 10:03 that night, the mast gave way. It was not a simple break, but an eruption. Every ounce of tension held in the cables and the framework released at once in a violent burst. The mast exploded outward, sending jagged oak fragments flying through the air like shrapnel. Steel cables snapped free from their anchors, slicing through the interior with lethal speed. Above them, the colossal canvas, now soaked and weighing more than 2 tons, collapsed with a roar, smothering everything beneath it. What followed remains one of the most horrifying and least understood moments of the night. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence only through fragments of evidence and the testimonies of a few who had been outside the tent. Inside, no one survived to speak. What is known is this: the combination of shattered wood, snapping cables, collapsing steel supports, and the immense weight of the canvas produced a disaster of many layers. Those standing near the exits may have had a fleeting chance to escape, perhaps a few seconds at most. Some likely moved toward the openings, but under the suffocating black fabric, in complete darkness and chaos, all sense of direction vanished. The tent did not simply fall, it folded upon itself, wrapping and trapping people beneath it, forming pockets where the air vanished quickly. Outside, the gale continued to batter the wreckage, twisting and pulling the collapsed structure, making rescue attempts futile. Residents from the nearby town rushed toward the field, drawn by the thunderous noise. What they found resembled a vision of the apocalypse. The once grand tent was now a massive heap of black canvas, thrashing violently in the storm. Faint screams echoed from beneath it, muffled cries for help drowned by the wind and rain. People tried desperately to tear through the heavy fabric, but every effort was met with failure. The weight was overwhelming, and the structure was a tangled maze. Minute by minute, the voices grew fainter. Until they were gone, the storm raged for nearly 40 minutes before its fury began to fade. When the winds finally eased enough for an organized rescue, it was already too late. It took hours to dismantle the wreckage layer by layer, peeling away the soaked canvas to reach what lay beneath. What rescuers found defied comprehension. 317 people were declared dead. Every performer in Silas Godfrey's troupe, every spectator who had entered that tent. Not a single person within its walls survived. The causes of death were numerous: skulls shattered by flying wood, bodies torn by steel cables, bones crushed beneath collapsed supports, and many asphyxiated beneath the smothering canvas. In many cases, the injuries were so severe and overlapping that coroners could not determine which wound had ended a life first. By the standards of the time, the local authorities responded swiftly. At dawn, a coroner was summoned, and county police established a perimeter. Telegrams were sent to Manchester and Liverpool pleading for assistance, but the scale of the disaster was far beyond what a small industrial town could manage. There was not even a morgue large enough to contain the dead. There were not enough coffins. There were not even enough men to dig the graves. 317 bodies waited for burial, and time moved against them. The solution was swift, cold, and unsentimental. A nearby field was chosen and hastily consecrated. It became a cemetery overnight. Trenches were carved into the wet soil, common graves long and deep. The bodies were carried there one by one. Those who could be wrapped in cloth were covered, while others were placed directly into the earth when the fabric ran out. There was no ceremony, no hymn, only the rhythmic sound of shovels and rain falling on open ground. Officials attempted to maintain records. Identification was performed when possible, but many faces were beyond recognition. They turned instead to personal belongings: pocket watches, wedding rings, children's toys, silver crucifixes, and faded photographs. These small objects, still glimmering in the mud, were all that remained of entire lives erased in a single night. Reginald Chamberlain, the county coroner, was assigned to lead the official investigation. His report, a document of 43 pages now stored in the National Archives in London, stands as both a work of precision and of silence. It describes injuries with surgical detail and outlines the sequence of mechanical failure with methodical clarity. Yet in several sections, the language turns vague, careful, almost evasive. Entire pages reveal nothing but bureaucratic stillness. And then there is the sealed appendix, a confidential document ordered closed for 50 years. Why? What could demand such secrecy? The truth does not appear in the main report, but in the edges, in personal letters, in forgotten newspaper fragments, and in official statements that vanished from circulation within days of publication. When one examines these fragments, a darker picture emerges, one that Victorian authorities deemed too dangerous for the public to know. The first problem was responsibility. Who, in the eyes of the law, was to be held accountable for the deaths of 317 people? Silas Godfrey was dead. The builders who had erected the tent were dead as well. The mast had been purchased from a timber merchant in Liverpool, who quickly claimed that the buyer was responsible for inspecting its quality. The licensing officials argued that their duty extended only to administrative permits, not structural safety. Every institution pointed to another. No one accepted guilt. The second issue was social shame. Among the dead were not only working-class spectators, but also figures of status: a local magistrate and his wife, 2 wealthy merchants, and the son of a reverend. Their presence at what society regarded as a vulgar display, a freak show, contradicted Victorian ideals of morality and propriety. Families refused to acknowledge it publicly. They buried their grief in silence, fearful that association with such entertainment would tarnish their names. And then came the most disturbing revelation. Analysis of the injuries revealed that many victims had not died from falling debris or structural collapse alone. They had been crushed by one another. Panic had spread faster than the collapse itself. People had trampled others in blind terror, clawing toward exits that no longer existed. In the end, the tragedy was not only a failure of wood and rope. It was a failure of humanity, of fear overpowering compassion, of secrecy outweighing truth. Near the tent's torn exits, bodies were stacked upon one another in silent testimony to panic. The evidence was undeniable. People had crushed each other in the darkness. Children were trampled. The elderly were thrown down and abandoned in the chaos. This brutal unraveling of order, this surrender of civility in the face of fear, shattered the Victorian illusion of composure and moral superiority. It revealed that beneath the polished surface of reason and restraint, there was something far more primal. In his private notes, pages that never appeared in his official report, Reginald Chamberlain made an observation that changed the tone of his entire investigation. Among the bodies of the performers, he found evidence not of flight, but of protection. The strong man had been discovered arched over 3 children, his back broken beneath fallen beams, his body shielding them from fatal impact. Constance Fairchild, the contortionist, was found covering an elderly woman, her twisted form still positioned as if creating a pocket of air. The Siamese twins lay entwined with others, their joined arms extended, as though holding up the collapsing canvas in a final act of defiance. These details were omitted from the public record. They did not fit the image Victorian society wished to preserve. To acknowledge that these so-called freaks, long displayed as curiosities for profit, had died performing acts of heroism would have forced the public to confront an unbearable truth, that the humanity they mocked was deeper, purer, and more courageous than their own. For a few days, the tragedy occupied the newspapers. The Manchester Guardian gave it 3 paragraphs. The Liverpool Mercury gave it 5, but then without warning, the story began to fade. Columns that had promised follow-ups were suddenly replaced with trivial notices. Within 2 weeks, the coverage had vanished entirely. It was not public disinterest that silenced the story. It was deliberate suppression. Behind closed doors, officials warned editors that continued discussion could provoke panic and lead to stricter government regulation of public entertainments. Theaters, music halls, and other circuses, all industries with considerable financial influence, would be affected. The instruction was clear: the less said, the better. Victorian England obeyed. Deference to authority was its most deeply ingrained reflex. The families of the victims received little. A few charitable committees were formed, collecting donations from sympathetic citizens. Some households received £5, others 10. The amount depending not on need but on status and familiarity with those in power. It was, by the standards of the time, the equivalent of several months of wages for an industrial worker. Significant perhaps on paper, but utterly meaningless against the loss of an entire life. The field that had once held laughter and spectacle was now a graveyard. The names of the dead faded from headlines and soon from memory. What remained were whispers, rumors of what had truly been seen inside the tent, and what had been deliberately hidden from the world. Purcell Davenport, one of the acrobats who died that night, left behind a widow and 4 children in London. From the charity fund, his wife received 76 shillings. That small amount carried the family for barely 3 months. When the coins ran out, she surrendered 2 of her children to an orphanage and found work in a textile factory. Her story was not unique. It was the quiet fate shared by countless working-class families who lost their providers in Victorian England. Robert Fairchild, the younger brother of Constance, survived by accident. He had fallen ill that afternoon and remained at a nearby inn instead of performing. At 16 years old, he lost his sister, his livelihood, and his makeshift family all in one night. Records show that he attempted to continue performing on his own, but fortune never returned. In 1878, his name appeared in the registries of a poorhouse in Birmingham. 4 years later, he vanished from all documentation. His death, like so many others connected to the tragedy, went unrecorded and unremarked. The field where the tent once stood was abandoned. No structure replaced it. No memorial marked the ground. For decades it lay silent, an empty expanse occasionally grazed by sheep. Locals avoided the place, especially after dusk. Whispers spread through the town, voices that carried on the wind, silhouettes glimpsed in the fog, faint lights moving through the mist. Over time, the field became part of local folklore, a landscape haunted not by ghosts but by memory. In 1923, nearly half a century after the disaster, a businessman purchased the land to build a warehouse. When workers began to dig the foundations, their shovels struck bone. Many bones. The common graves of 1875 had been shallowly marked, and decades of grass and rain had erased their boundaries. Work halted immediately. Archaeologists were summoned. The remains were exhumed, catalogued where possible, and reburied in a proper cemetery. A modest plaque was placed over the new gravesite. It read simply, "In memory of those who perished in the Circus tragedy, September 1875. The story might have ended there, buried again, beneath the soil and the silence of history. But fate had preserved a single relic. In 1967, a photograph was discovered inside a family trunk belonging to the descendants of the man who had taken it. It was found among glass plates, receipts, and casual letters, mundane artifacts of a forgotten life. No one in the family understood its importance until a local historian, while researching Victorian entertainments, noticed that the names written in the photographer's notes matched those of the 1875 victims. Only then did the image reveal its truth. It was not merely a photograph of a circus troupe. It was the final record of life, 37 people captured 6 hours before their collective death. Every face frozen in that image carried a story unfinished. The woman in the second row, third from the left, was to be married the following week. The tall man in the back had already purchased his ticket to America. The small boy in front was just learning to read. All their futures, all their possibilities, erased in 40 minutes of wind and darkness. The tragedy of 1875 remains shrouded not because evidence is scarce, but because silence was chosen. It was a wound Victorian society refused to examine, a reflection of the era's hierarchy of grief, where some lives were mourned publicly and others were quietly erased. For those who performed under the tent, the world saw deformity, spectacle, and difference. But in their final hour, they revealed something extraordinary. They revealed courage, compassion, and the very essence of humanity that their audience had failed to see. They were both celebrated and shunned, admired and rejected. In life, they drew crowds eager to pay and watch them perform. In death, they became nothing more than administrative burdens, statistics to be processed quickly and forgotten quietly. The tragedy tore open the hypocrisy of a society that loved spectacle, but refused to see the humanity behind it. Among the archives of the Home Office, there exists a letter dated October 1875. It was written by a Manchester police officer to his superior in London. In it he stated, "It would be prudent to discourage additional journalistic investigation. The incident, although regrettable, involved primarily individuals of questionable social category. Prolonged attention serves only to disturb public sensibilities without corresponding benefit." The letter was never officially sent, yet its preservation reveals the sentiment that silently governed the system. This was not simply bureaucracy. It was moral calculation. It exposed the deep fracture between the image Victorian society projected and the values it truly practiced. A civilization that prided itself on intellect, civility, and Christian virtue was perfectly capable of assigning worth to human life based on class, occupation, and conformity. Freak show performers, in official eyes, were lives of lesser value, undeserving of deep investigation, fair compensation, or lasting remembrance. But look again at the photograph. Do not see curiosities. Do not see attractions. See human beings. See the acrobat who conquered fear each night beneath the gaslights. See the contortionist whose joints screamed in pain, yet who smiled through every performance. See the children who played between acts, dreamed impossible dreams, and built castles in the dirt while waiting for their turn to perform. See complete, complex souls who deserved dignity, compassion, and memory. The tragedy of 1875 was not only the collapse of a tent, it was the collapse of moral conscience, a society that lost 317 lives and allowed silence to bury them committed a far deeper failure, one of the heart. By bringing this story back from oblivion, by naming those forgotten, by acknowledging their humanity, we do more than remember. We restore balance. We execute a small but sacred act of justice. When the storm passed that September night, when the winds fell silent and the soaked canvas lay torn upon the field, something irreversible had shifted. Not in the laws, not in official policies, not even in social attitudes. Those would remain unmoved for decades, but within those who lived near that field, who heard the screams, who lifted the bodies, who dug the graves, something changed forever. They carried the knowledge that beneath the polished image of Victorian grandeur lay a fragile truth. Civilization itself could collapse as swiftly, as completely, as any circus tent. If this story unsettled you, if it stirred something within you about how societies choose which lives are mourned and which are forgotten, hold on to that discomfort. It means your conscience is awake, and if you wish to continue uncovering these forgotten stories of the Victorian world, those silenced lives erased from official memory, subscribe to the channel. There are countless other photographs waiting, in the shadows, each preserving voices that still whisper to be remembered. Each one reminding us that humanity, no matter how ignored, never truly disappears.